Hey guys, Laura here with STP. Is SAT reading your Achilles heel? Do you find that you have no idea what the passage is saying and you keep reading the same sentence over and over again? Or do you have it narrowed down to two and then constantly pick the wrong one? If this is you, I can literally relate. This was me in high school, and it was no wonder that my math score was 140 points higher than my English score at that time. But since then, as an SAT prep coach, I've learned to take my score from a 640 to a 780 in English, and I'm going to show you guys the tips and tricks I use on this new iteration of the SAT to do just that. So, in a nutshell, this video aims to give you more efficient tips and tools so that you can tackle the SAT reading passages effectively to boost your own score. Before we get started, if you are gearing up to take an SAT soon, make sure you hit that subscribe button and notification bell below. I've had countless students tell me how much this channel has helped them improve their own scores. So be a smarty pants and act like a 1600 scorer and hit that subscribe button now. First, this video is brought to you by Preply, the OG digital SAT prep app that's available in the App Store and in Google Play. If you like the idea of doing some daily practice in a casual way where you're just doing, maybe 10 to 15 minutes each day, Preply is perfect for you. You don't need to sit down to a computer and take a full-length practice test, guys, if you want to improve on the SAT. Just filter to the type of question you're struggling with, and Preply will give you a ton of exclusive, unique questions for you to try with the detailed, helpful, and simple to understand answer explanations when you get something wrong. Also, Preply has vocabulary flashcards, which is a new feature. So if you are struggling with words and context questions, we've added in high probability SAT words that have a higher likelihood of showing up on your test. And also there is an AI tutor in the app named Whizbee that you can ask all of your questions to. So if you're ready to do something different to get a different result, then go down Preply today and take your prep to the next level. I will link it up here so you can get that right now. All right, first guys, I want to give you 7 tips that I use myself to get a high 700 English score or near perfect every single time I take a digital SAT. Okay, tip number 1, make sure you read the question first to know what it's asking you and to pinpoint what you need to do to tackle the question efficiently. Tip number 2, if it is a central ideas or detailed question, just read the passage once over and you'll be able to know what the answer is. You don't need to read very detailed and specifically on those. Tip number 3, look for old belief, new belief comparisons. It happens a lot on these passages, especially on science ones. Tip number 4 is look for transition words. Transition words are very important parts in the passage and you want to pay special attention to them. Tip number 5, on inferences questions, you're going to want to read more thoroughly and even possibly annotate as you go to increase your success rate. Tip number 6, and I would say this is probably the biggest, most important tip of all the tips I give you guys today. You're going to want to use process of elimination and look for 3 wrong answers to get it down to the right one. And lastly, tip number 7, if the text doesn't say it, don't pick it. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna model a few different problems for you guys. They are all different types of reading questions. So I can show you how to tackle each one, and I'm going to incorporate those tips that I just gave you into how I tackle these. Okay, so do you guys remember my first tip? It's to read the question first so you can pinpoint what kind of question you're on. So that's what I'm gonna do here. It says, which choice best states the main idea of the text? Okay, if you guys are on a main idea, main purpose, or overall structure of the text question, you do not need to read thoroughly and closely. With these, all you need to do is just read the paragraph one time, and then you'll be able to use process of elimination to get it down to the right one. Honestly, pretty easily for the most part. However, I will say every single question I picked for this video is a hard level difficulty. So it might not come as easily as, let's say, a medium or an easy question would, but nonetheless, you shouldn't have to read super closely, and that's going to save you some time on these. So I'm going to just read this once over. As I'm reading, I'm going to process what I'm reading as well. Some bigger words I might change to make them more simpler so that I can understand. But overall, I'm just looking for big picture here, big picture ideas. So we have 4 centuries, the widespread acknowledgement of the involvement of the cerebellum, a dense brain structure in vertebrates, in coordinating motor control in humans has hindered recognition of other possible functions of the structure. Okay, what does that mean to me? It sounds like 4 centuries, so this is an old belief. They thought that the cerebellum coordinated motor control, and what that did was it prevented them to recognize other possible functions that the cerebellum had. Okay, next sentence. Neuroscience research from the last 2 decades now suggests, we got a new belief. They found out something new. That the cerebellum regulates emotion and social behavior. Okay, so they found a new function for it. And recent research by IC and colleagues has identified a pathway connecting the cerebellum to a center for motivation and reward processing known as the ventral tegmental area, VTA. Now listen, I could have just skipped this too and just said VTA. Notice I said IC instead of trying to spend time pronouncing that person's name. You're going to encounter a lot of difficult name pronunciations. Use abbreviations. That way it doesn't break up the flow of your reading and your comprehension of understanding the passage. Anyways, I feel like I have a big picture understanding of this. So now I'm going to go through and I'm going to look for 3 wrong answers instead of trying to hone in on the right answer. Because if I try to hone in on the right answer, I'm going to make myself vulnerable and susceptible to picking a trap answer. So let me demonstrate. So we have A, what states the main idea? A says the recent verification of a pathway between the VTA and the cerebellum confirms the cerebellum's long suspected role in motor coordination. Okay, this was not something that was long suspected. They already knew that it was part of motor coordination. It was already an acknowledgement, not just being suspected. So I'm going to get rid of A. B says, recent advances in the field of neuroscience have challenged widely accepted claims about the function of a pathway connecting the VTA and the cerebellum. I get no sense in this passage that anything is being challenged. So that's definitely a no. I'm going to get rid of B. C says, the cerebellum has primarily been thought to regulate motor functioning, but in recent years, neuroscience researchers have been uncovering additional functions. That sounds great. I am going to hold that and we'll come back to that in a minute. D says, technological limitations have historically hindered the study of the cerebellum, but the recent development of new technologies has led to greater insights into its functions. This is an irrelevant answer choice to me because they're not talking about technological limitations at all. I know A, B, and D are wrong for various reasons, and I couldn't find anything wrong with C, so I'm going to pick that. Now, what's interesting is one of my tips was if the text doesn't say it, don't pick it. You will find that the right answer a lot of the times has synonyms to what the text is saying. For example, notice how it said, in recent years, they have uncovered additional functions. What is my synonym for in recent years? From the last 2 decades. And And, obviously they've uncovered additional functions because they talked about how it regulates emotion and social behavior. It gave other examples. So we know we're good picking C because the text basically is saying what C is saying, just in a different way. All right, guys, if you're finding this video helpful so far, show me some love, hit the like button below. Okay, so that last example was a central ideas example. So again, just to recap, if you see a main purpose, a main idea, or an overall structure of text question, read for big picture, read it once over. Don't get into the nitty gritty and stress yourself out about every single little detail. Just read it once. The answer choice should be pretty obvious to you, and you can use process of elimination. Now we're going to move on to a detailed example where they ask about something specific. If they ask about something specific, it still doesn't need to be getting down into the nitty-gritty details of it. You can still read it once over, get a general sense of things that are going on, and try to pay attention and be mindful to the thing that they're asking about. So if you encounter that word in the passage, or you get to a part where they're, talking about that thing, then you can really pay attention and try to get the answer to it. But again, my first tip is to read the question just to get a sense of what they're asking for. So it says, what does the text most strongly suggest about Sleep No More's use of its performance space? Okay. So they really want us to focus on the use of its performance space. So as I read this, I'm looking for that. It says the most recent iteration of the immersive theater experience Sleep No More, which premiered in New York City in 2011, transforms its performance space, a 5-story warehouse, into a 1930s era hotel. Okay, they're already getting into the performance space. So far, what I'm getting out of it is they make it feel like it's in a 1930s hotel. Audience members who wander through the labyrinthine venue, which, by the way, this basically just means it's like a maze. So they wander through the venue that's like a maze at their own pace and follow the actors as they play out simultaneous, interweaving narrative loops, confront the impossibility of experiencing the production in its entirety. The play's refusal of narrative coherence. Okay, hang on. I'm just going to note this. It's impossible for them to experience the entire production. Why? Well, because it's a maze and it's huge and they're wandering around, so they might miss parts of the maze. The play's refusal of narrative coherence, thus, we have a transition word. This is important. So it's refusal of narrative coherence, basically meaning it's not following a linear format. It doesn't have a storyline that has a clear start and a clear end because they're wandering around. So they might experience different things at different times than someone else. Thus hinges on the sense of spatial fragmentation that the venue's immense and intricate layout generates. Now, I just have to say, venue is just a synonym for performance space. It's where it's being held at, okay? So to me, what it sounds like here is that the maze or the venue or the performance space is so big and so intricate that and they've kind of cut it up into different fragments or parts because it's a maze. So it's not, again, it doesn't flow in a coherent way. People are going to go into different parts at different times, and events aren't necessarily going to be in a linear fashion. Okay, I think I get this. I'm going to look at the answer choices. Now, I will say I'm kind of thinking out loud for you guys so you can hear my thought process. When I'm taking the test, I'm not going to take this long to process it. It's going to be quicker because it's just going to be me internally thinking these things and then going through the answers. But I want to be able to verbalize it to you so that you can process and think in the same way so that you know what you're doing and you know what you're looking for, if that makes any sense. Let's go through the answers now. We're going to use process of elimination. I want to try to find 3 wrong answers here to get it down to the right answer. Okay, let's start with A. The choice of a New York City venue likely enabled the play's creators to experiment with the use of theatrical space in a way that venues from earlier productions could not. Okay, did they talk about experimenting? And did they talk about doing it in a way that others could not? I personally did not get any comparison with other people and other productions. It was just focused on this one production. So here's a case where this is an answer choice that could be true, but there's not enough information. Remember, guys, if the text doesn't say it, don't pick it. So since the text doesn't compare this to any other productions and doesn't explicitly say this is a unique thing, we cannot pick A. We've got to cross that out. We don't know this. Okay. Let's look at answer choice B. Audience members likely find the experience of the play disappointing because they generally cannot make their way through the entire venue. Again, if the text doesn't say it, don't pick it. Nowhere in this text did it talk about the audience being disappointed. So that's definitely out. Okay, let's look at C. The production's dependence on a particular performance environment would likely make it difficult to reproduce exactly in a different theatrical space. This sounds like it could be correct. I'm not seeing anything completely wrong with this yet, so I'm going to hold that. D says, audience members who navigate the space according to a recommended itinerary will likely have a better grasp of the play's narrative than audience members who depart from that itinerary. Again, they're not talking about a recommended itinerary at all in there. So even though that could be true, the text doesn't mention it, so we can't pick it. So by process of elimination, we have to go with C. What is a synonym for dependence, right? Because again, a lot of the times the answer choice is going to say what the text said in a different way. So the word dependence is basically up in the text with the word hinges. It hinges on a sense of spatial fragmentation, meaning it's dependent on a particular performance environment. Saying the same thing in a different way, C has to be right. Okay, so far the last two examples, although they were different from each other, one was a big picture question, the other was a detailed question. You could handle them in roughly the same way. You don't need to read in a very close fashion. You don't need to make sure you understand every little detail. You can read once and use process of elimination to get to the right answer, even if it's a hard question. The example I'm about to show you right now is slightly different, and I want you to handle it differently. So when you're on an inferences question, that's a time where you do have to read more closely and follow what the text is saying from sentence to sentence in order to be able to come up with an accurate conclusion. Let me show you what I mean. Now, first and foremost, when you get to a new question, again, you want to read it just to know what kind of question you're on and how to tackle it. So I see it says, what most logically completes the text? I know that means I'm on an inference question. I know this means I need to read more closely. So what I'm going to do is take it sentence by sentence, and I might even put an annotation down to follow the flow of the argument as well. So let me demonstrate. First sentence says, researchers recently found that disruptions to an enjoyable experience, like a short series of advertisements during a television show, often increase viewers' reported enjoyment. Okay, let me break that down into an annotation. So, disruption basically is like an interruption or breaking up an enjoyable experience. So, enjoyable experience, disruption. What does that cause? It increases viewers' enjoyment. Okay, so that's the first thing. Okay, second sentence. Suspecting that disruptions to an unpleasant experience would have the opposite effect. Ooh, that sounds like a hypothesis. The researchers had participants listen to construction noise for 30 minutes and anticipated that those whose listening experience was frequently interrupted with short breaks of silence would thus blank. Okay, so their hypothesis is that unpleasant experience disruptions would cause the opposite effect, which is going to be a decrease in viewers' enjoyment or listeners' enjoyment, the experiencer's enjoyment, essentially. And you know what? I actually want to relate this to my own experience so that I can make sense of this. This makes sense to me because I think about if I hear someone jackhammering outside, yes, it's annoying. Like maybe I'm trying to get work done and they're jackhammering, and then all of a sudden it stops. You have like that sense of like relief for a minute, like, oh, it's finally over. And then when it starts again, it's like even more aggravating because you realize, oh shoot, it's not even really over yet. The same with car alarms. I'm sure you guys have heard a car alarm going off and then it stops and then it starts again. It's like the worst experience. So that hypothesis makes perfect sense to me. So now that I'm thinking about it, if they were listening to construction noise for 30 minutes and then it was interrupted, with short breaks of silence, I feel like, you know, the logical conclusion I would come to is they would have a less enjoyable experience. It would be so frustrating for them. So I'm looking for an answer choice that basically states that. So let's start with A. We're going to say it finds the disruptions more irritating as time went on. Okay. We have to go back to the hypothesis because what we wrote down was an unpleasant experience. If we had a disruption to that, it's going to decrease the person's enjoyment. Does it talk about it getting worse though as time goes on? No. So again, this is something that could be true, but the text doesn't state it. This as time went on part isn't right. It doesn't get more irritating as time goes on. I'm going to get rid of A. You got to get real nitpicky, right? Okay, let's look at B. Rate the listening experience as more negative than those whose listening experience was uninterrupted. Okay, well, that we can hold, right? I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with that. Let's check C and D, because again, we're trying to look for 3 wrong answers. C says, rate the experience of listening to construction noise as lasting for less time than it actually lasted. Does the hypothesis talk about them estimating or rating how long something lasted for? No, that's irrelevant. So I'm going to get rid of C. D says, perceive the volume of the construction noise as growing softer over time. Do they talk about volume in this? No, they don't. So honestly, it becomes pretty obvious when you're looking for 3 wrong answers what the right answer is. The only one that makes sense and is relevant to the passage is B. All right, guys, if you're finding this video helpful and you want to dive deeper into English strategies, then sign up for our self-paced English course. I've created a plethora of materials and video lessons that are exclusive to the course and not available on YouTube. So if you want to crush the SAT English sections, then now is the perfect time to start. Go ahead and click this link and you can sign up today. If you use the promo code 50OFF at checkout, you're going to get $50 off the course as well. All right, guys, just to recap the 7 tips I used today on these passages, let's just go through all 7 again. So number 1 is you want to make sure you read the question first so you know how to tackle the passage. Number 2, just read casually once for central idea and details questions. Tip number 3, look for old belief versus new belief comparisons. Tip number 4, look for transition words, especially contrast words like however or nevertheless, or causation words like thus and therefore. Tip number 5, read more thoroughly and annotate for inferences questions and try to come up with your own conclusion first. Tip number 6, and this is the biggest one I think on the whole list, use process of elimination to get rid of 3 wrong answers. And tip number 7, if the text doesn't say it, don't pick it. All right, guys, that's all for this video. I hope you guys found it super helpful. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, go ahead and comment below reading skills so I know you stuck with me to the very end. I appreciate you guys so much, and until next time, happy prepping.